Welcome back to Decouple. Today, I'm joined by Zion Lights. For the very few of you who don't know, Zion is a British author and activist. She was a prominent spokesperson for Extinction Rebellion and the founder and editor of XR's Hourglass newspaper. More recently, Zion was the country director for environmental progress, and very excitedly, we're happy to explore and announce today that Zion has founded a new organization called Emergency Reactor. Zion holds a master's in science communication and is the author of The Ultimate Guide to Green Parenting. And I believe you have a TED Talk on how awesome dark sky star watching is. Is that right, Zion?
Yeah, that is right.
So Zion, a climate nerd, fascinated by space and the stars, passionate about the environment. Am I getting the broad strokes correct here?
I think so, yeah. You could probably put in Becky, few of the labels, but
was that sorry, Trekkie?
Yeah.
Nice. Who's your favorite character?
Oh, controversial. I'm gonna say Picard.
Okay,
and
yeah.
And Data. I mean Data, but then everybody says them, right? Everybody says them, and I actually really like Riker as well. I'm a next gen fan.
I hear a lot of people who are kind of optimists and humanists talking about how kind of Star Trek is the future that we kind of want to create.
I mean, really, if you're into sci-fi, it's one of the best examples, and I'm really into sci-fi.
Right.
But a lot of it is negative and apocalyptic, and then you've got Star Trek, which has got
yeah,
some of the better projections, kind of your opposite to the Black Mirror style. What's going to go wrong? Everything's bad. You've got some of the really good stuff in there, and some of that now has come to pass as well, hasn't it? So it's quite exciting if you grew up
for sure.
it. Actually, can I scrap my answer? My favorite character is Data playing Sherlock. That's my favorite character. How nerdy is that?
All right. Really... I love it. Okay, I mean, so Zion, like I said, it's been about a year. We talked, I think, just as you'd left Extinction Rebellion and made this big transition towards really full-time advocacy around nuclear. It's been a year, lots of lessons, I'm sure. Something I was really excited to sort of touch bases with you on again is this concept of kind of movement building, moving beyond sort of charismatic personalities, doing TED Talks and that kind of thing towards, how do we mobilize people? Obviously, COVID has been an enormous challenge. I'm really very hopeful and cautiously optimistic that we're kind of leaving that behind as science wins and more people get vaccinated. So I wanted to kind of explore a bit about kind of your experiences over the last year and what you're looking forward to in the future, and of course tying in your new organization. So maybe let's start with just a reflection on what the last year's been like, lessons learned. You've had some cool stuff. You had this banana beach party. Like, you managed to do a lot given the lockdowns that you've been living, which have been very severe in the UK. So let's kind of touch base in the last year.
So it's been a difficult year for activism, is what I'd say, across the board because of the lockdown. For me, it's been a roller coaster of a year. When you say it's a year, it really makes me think, wow, really? Is that it? And I started out at EP and then founded Nuclear for Net Zero. Did some actions with Nuclear for Net Zero, went down to Ipswich a couple of times. One time to the actual beach with the Sizewell site would be, and then that's, that group's still going. I love that little community that we've built there, but it has been very hard to do actions. We're only just coming out of lockdown here in the UK, and it's still, numbers are still quite limited. Travel is still quite limited. So my focus has turned more to online. Like, what can I do online? That seems to be the way everything's gone, which actually, in some ways it opens a lot of doors. So one thing I've been doing, which I've now wrapped up because universities are kind of coming to an end for summer, is university talks. So I've spoken at like 12 universities. I did one a week.
Nice.
And it was easy because it's all over Zoom. It's much easier than previously. I think the one that had the most people was the Cambridge University talk. And it was all about these issues. It was about the scientific consensus. And I'd actually say it's quite similar to what Extinction Rebellion did, where we had these heading for extinction talks. I don't know if you've heard of them. It's actually kind of like what got the momentum going in the beginning was that there were this slide pack made with kind of suggestions on how to present. They did some training for people on how to present, and ordinary people went out in the areas and gave talk on, this is what the climate science says, this is why it's a solid consensus. what do we do next? So my talk's
And
kind of along those lines.
who's been inviting you? Like, as something I'm really curious about, something I've been thinking about a lot is, it's really the kind of next generations that are important to
Yeah,
talk to you,
yeah.
people that don't
It's
have
funny actually because it's funny, Chris, because I was offered an opportunity with a pro-nuclear group, which is a great group. They're doing lots of good stuff. I was offered to go around and speak energy groups and engineers at universities, and I actually turned that down because I said, A, already convinced, and it's kind of an echo chamber, and B, my space, and this is the space I refuse to leave, is the environmental movement. Right. I'm not in that group anymore. I wasn't arrested for climate action 15 years ago just to leave it because they don't like some of my views now. That's my space. So I basically just reached out to climate groups, only green groups, EcoSoc. They will have their own different groups at these universities. Because when I was at university, I founded the first green group that we had at Renning University. So we always wanted speakers come in and talk to us. And I offer these talks for free as part of my activism. So about 12 take-ups. Thought that's enough. That's 12 weeks. I kind of refined my slide that went along, kind of based on responses. And actually, what's interesting, Chris, I started out putting quite a lot in there, dispelling myths around nuclear. And what I found is actually younger generation, they don't have a lot of those myths in their mind. Like, they don't even know what those are. These are very much old school, like boomer fears that you don't need to go into. You don't need to go into waste. You don't need to go into radiation. For them, this generation, which is very keyed up on fake news and how to spot facts, like they're very keyed up on the kind of informational age. You just hear that there's a consensus. See the data, because I'm doing slides, they see the data on the screen. There is this consensus that the IPCC and all these other bodies say we need nuclear to combat the climate emergency, and that's it. They're on board. And I'd get to the questions and I'd be all ready for these like anti-nuclear, you've seen what the space is like, right? Oh, it's gonna get all these questions quick, I've got to get ready. And I wouldn't get any of them. I wouldn't get any. It would be genuine questions. What do we do? How do we move this forward? Can we help? People are offering to come on protest, which again, it's very difficult at the moment with lockdown, but I'm hoping to get to that stage. So at the moment, I've just been saying, come to the website, sign up to the mailing list, and we'll start getting organised. But it was so promising and so exciting. I'm really looking forward to going back to doing that when the universities open up again in September.
Yeah, no, I mean, those are really interesting thoughts. I've certainly been thinking about, actually trying to go and speak to the engineering departments, less from the perspective of, that it's not around ideas of sort of them being easier to convince or them already being on board, but just trying to get those folks fired up. Because I think sometimes, I don't want to essentialize anybody, but I think sometimes there's less of an activist impulse in that scene. They're, more working within the system. Every training program comes with its own kind of culture, right? But the idea that you can speak to that kind of a group and say, hey, like, those folks, I think, have a lot of concerns. They go into their education wanting to solve problems, and sort of getting them more onto the activist side of things, I think, is really interesting. But what you're describing, speaking to these green groups, is really exciting and optimistic for me. I think there's like different country contexts, and something as an outsider, when I look at the UK, there's kind of features of UK society. You guys love animals. There's lots of animal welfare organizations. I think there's a really broad-based consensus and concern around climate change. It seems like the environmental movement is kind of a lot more active, or a larger majority of the population might identify as being environmentalist, which I would say is not so much the case in Canada and certainly in the US. In terms of my setting, I found myself really running into some brick walls with the environmental movement here. Really, it's the anti-nuclearism is just so baked into the DNA. And I've been able to sort of split off or talk to a few green folks, and when I can sit down with them and form that face-to-face human interaction, which is challenging to do on social media, right? But like, have a Zoom call, see the face, they see my intention, I see theirs. There's that possibility. But I'm really excited to hear that you're being so well received by these groups, and the fact that they're wanting to sign up and do activism that's huge. Because again, like, transitioning from this really important stage of this kind of charismatic leadership coming up towards a mass-based movement, that's what's, I think, so essential to showing the politicians that there's support for evidence-based climate solutions.
Actually, anti-nuclear sentiment is baked into groups here. It is baked into the environmental groups. But what I would draw a distinction between is the traditional kind of boomer groups, who not only anti-nuclear, but in my experience, where I wrote a book about green parenting, and it went out to those kind of parent environmentalists. I had a chapter in there on vaccines, and they reacted very badly to that. So they're also quite anti-vax. Like, there's a lot of traditional views in those groups that the younger generations don't have. And my concern would be that those views get passed on, because that's what the tribe does. And that's why you kind of have to reach out to those groups and make sure they don't get bought into all of these awful unscientific ideas, because once you're in the tribe, it's quite hard to see your, not even just to leave, but to see your way out, and I know what that's like, because I used to be part of this group, but I'm kind of, somewhere there on the cusp as a millennial, and I've rejected a lot of these old ideas. Now, another old idea that's very baked in is the idea of growth.
Right.
And use less energy. I remember I wrote a whole book on using less energy, and I'm not saying people can't go ahead and do that, but it's just being honest about, well, we can all do that, and it's still not enough, really, is it? So let's be honest that we still need really good, clean, reliable energy. And the message really resonates with younger generation of people. When you think of them, they understand this because they are growing up with tech the previous generations didn't have. And again, I was kind of on the cusp. They want their phones to be charged, right? They understand the value of electricity in a way that people who could kind of switch off from it because they didn't grow up with it don't understand. And if anything, we're going more that way, right? And we're using more tech all the time, and we're using more energy all the time. So it really resonates with them, and they want to know. And the other thing is they're surrounded, at least here, by this very negative humor. There's no way out. We're all going to have to go back to living this really stripped back lifestyle, and it's all our fault, and nature's dying, and and they want solutions. If you offer a solution and it's there's scientific evidence behind it, they're desperate for that. They really want to hear that. That's good news. That's, and it's something worth fighting for. It's something really good to put out there. And actually, no one else is really doing it. And I think there's only so much you can hammer away at the same messages of everything's bad and you're losing everything. And in my talks, I make sure I put this in about my parents' background and the world that they came from. You want to talk about apocalyptic scenarios, let's talk about poverty. Let's talk about these people who live with energy poverty and energy inequality. And another thing I find among these young people is that they're more concerned than any other generation about social justice issues, and they mean it. They care about intersectionality. They care about, you see it, right, in all this like wokeism and backlash against wokeism, but in a really basic way, they do care about other people and about making sure that human rights are protected. And actually, from my perspective, that's always been missing in traditional environmentalism. And when and deliberately missing, not accidentally, because I'd raise stuff, and even as recent as Extinction Rebellion, I'd be told that's not a climate issue.
Yeah, no, I mean, there is.
I'd say, well, actually, you can't just separate it out. These are all of these issues do overlap. So they really hear that, and it's very positive.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of Malthusian element that runs through the environmental movement and is so present in many of its foundational thinkers. I think when you bring it to environmentalist attention, there's an immediate sort of defensive reaction, and I mean, fairly so. I mean, those politics are pretty awful when you think about the logical extension of their arguments. The population anxiety. It's interesting you're talking about energy poverty overseas. I had a great conversation with Ted Nordhaus some time ago, and he was like, when you think about that Mad Max aesthetic, in terms of how they imagine climate change, he's like, that's the reality that already exists in very poor countries with very low levels of energy use. And I think what you're bringing to the table is a more nuanced view that's not so black and white, and that recognizes that a lot of the kind of social justice achievements require activism, require charismatic leadership, etc. But there's a real taking for granted of things like energy, right, which permit people to have free time to go to school, etc. And there's this idea with degrowth that you can use a lot less energy and kind of have your cake and eat it too, in terms of having some of these some of the political achievements, right, around like feminism or abolition of slavery. I mean, these again are dependent on movements, but they're also dependent on something that we really take for granted, which is having enough energy to do the things that and to relieve that human labor. And the idea that you can sort of leave that behind and keep the sort of politics, the progressive politics, and go to a very simplistic level of development is, I think, for me, that was a real eye opener to me about you know, because I
Yeah.
think I came out of that sort of degrowth politics to a certain degree, and
And
I'm
people,
still,
yeah.
yeah, I'm still a little,
And
I'm
people,
still like there's got to be a middle ground. Like I think like there's some degree of conservation, like this kind of eco-modernist, like there's no limits, like energy, like just use as much as you can. Like I'm a little uncomfortable with that. Like I think there's not necessarily a middle ground, but there's a place somewhere that there's some compromises that can
of
be made.
course,
But
of course. But so I mean, there's several things here. So I've been asked to be the ambassador for Net Zero Week UK, and I was asked to write a thought piece, and I've written it on exactly that, about how we take energy for granted,
yeah,
and how poverty isn't just about, oh, those people don't have money. It's also about they don't have lighting when it's dark,
yeah,
have infrastructure that gives them access to vaccinations and hospitals. We don't know what it's like not to have that, because we are energy rich, we're
yeah,
energy privileged. And actually, these are concerns that younger people have when you talk to them, because they're thinking about it and they're starting to realize, oh, hang on a minute. Yeah, you know, the world might be in a bad place, but we kind of contributed to that. And I'm saying, I just feel guilty about that. Be glad you have a high quality of life, but let's now look at a way forward. And that's kind of what nuclear is, right? It's a way forward that still you get lots of energy, but it's a small land print, it's you know, low carbon, all of those things kind of come into play. But there's actually some really good data that's just been done on this that came out this week by Our World in Data. It's a very long document, really worth a read, on the need for economic growth and ways to do it more sustainably. So, you know, these pathways are being forged. It's just that there's not a lot of groups out there advocating for these things, right? It's like one extreme or the other.
yeah.
And as you say, you've got to just take a middle ground. Often when you look at data, it kind of is the middle ground, in my experience. And there's another example I wanted to give you of kind of generational split, which is over here. You know who Sir David Attenborough is?
Yeah, yeah.
Very, very celebrated,
He's the voice.
long-term
He's like
environmental
the Morgan
communicator.
Freedman of documentary, nature
And he just
documentaries, right?
turned, like, did he just turn 90? I think he just turned 90, something like that. Anyway, he's very respected. I mean, I grew up watching his documentaries, and
Yeah.
he did have an influential impact on me. So all respect to him for his long career in environmental work, but he's also the patron of a group called Population Matters, and they've been heavily criticized by human rights charities. I think Survival Internationalists have written a piece on this, about how kind of finger point, it's those people over there who are having too many children. And so recently, this was like in the last year, they made a little short documentary for social media, talking about this problem, which they call overpopulation, which I don't like that term. You know, population growth we can talk about, but they call it overpopulation. And they've got David Attenborough narrating, where every time he talks about overpopulation, they show swarms of brown people.
Yeah.
And actually, no, but what happened is, this is where I'm talking about this shift between that boomer traditionalist environmental ideology and the younger people. There's so many complaints.
Yeah.
They had to take it down. If you look it up, you'll find the news articles on it. So actually, you don't get away with that thinking anymore. People are very aware of it now, and they don't like it. And it's time to move on from that same narrative. And let's be really honest: has that narrative improved anything in the last 30 years? It's improved nothing in my lifetime. Our emissions have globally continued to rise, right? Actually, maybe it's time to stop doing the same thing over and over again, and hoping that it will make a difference. And try something a bit different, which is what I'm doing, you know, which I get a lot of flack for, but I just say to people, I've done everything. I've authored the book, I've written the articles, I've been arrested for climate action years ago. I've done everything, and I'll be honest, I don't think any of it made any difference, really. I don't think it. And people say, but you switch people onto climate change. Great, it make a difference. And measure the amount of carbon emissions that were saved. Because if I save a nuclear power plant, or I help to get one built, I can calculate number of emissions, right?
I always,
That, to me, that makes the difference.
I always, you know, the kind of like lifestyle politics and, you know, carbon accounting and the apps you can use. Okay, what's my carbon footprint? Could I like drive, you know, do a little bit less driving? And I think, you know, as data-driven activists, we think, hey, if I could save that nuclear plant, I could save like 12 million tons of CO2 going into the atmosphere every year. Like
it's
that's gonna trump a flight.
Really.
Yeah. That's what I mean. That's part of what drives me to this. Again, I talk about this ad nauseum.
But you know, even those calculators, I used to use one of these carbon calculators back when I wrote my book, and now I've since found out they're very biased. For example, when you put in your energy provider, they'll only give you points. It's a clean energy provider, which is renewables, because they exclude nuclear, a lot of them. So there's a lot of stuff going on with them, which isn't actually, it's not good math, it's not good data. You're kidding yourself. Unless you actually live off grid, you know, and I know one person who kind of lives like this, and you don't, he doesn't have a flush toilet, he has an outside compost toilet.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a fridge, he doesn't use electricity, he's got solar panels, very little energy for a few things that he uses that for.
Yeah.
Very off grid. Unless you're living like that, you might as well just give it up. But to be honest, even if we all lived like that, which first of all, no one else wants to live like that, even if we all did, let's be honest, it's not
Well, then you don't,
so little. But Chris,
yeah.
it's saving so little. Let's be honest and look at the numbers. It's saving so little, it's almost pointless. And
Yeah.
I hate to say that because I wrote an entire book on doing it, and I do live with quite a low comfort. I don't drive, all these other reasons in that, but a lot of this stuff, we have to do something different. We can't keep doing the same thing over and over. And then in another 30 years, we'll say, why didn't anything happen? Why are emissions going up? Let's be honest.
Yeah.
And stop distracting people as well. We talk about population, we talk about your energy use, or we talk about all these other things. We talk about system change. You can't talk about climate now without being told, no, it's system change. We need system change because it's this system that created climate change. Well, that's a whole separate issue, and you're muddying a really simple thing, which is bring down our emissions, work out how to, draw down whatever we can. That's it. That's climate change. Everything else is just ideology, and you can want that. You can want a better system. You can want political change, but they are separate systems, and they become very muddied here to the point that it can be hard to even talk about them without being told, no, Zion, because the system's broken. It's not a solution. And I'm like, well, you don't really want a solution to the problem that we're talking about, which is climate change. In that include poverty,
For sure. So, I think we've summarized a little bit the last year. Let's kind of carry on with that. You mentioned some of the campaigns you've been involved with, the challenges of COVID. Tell me about your new organization and what you're looking forward to, hopefully as society opens back up. Again, super excited about these university talks. That's, I'm often sort of, what's Zion up to? Like doing my kind of local country activism here and looking for inspiration and tactics and strategy and ideas. So break it down for me. What's the plan going forward? Why this organization? Why this aesthetic? Big, broad question here. But
it's funny, Chris, because there's all these Twitter battles going on all the time, and people are like, oh no, this happened or that happened, and I just say to them, Twitter is such a tiny fraction of what I'm doing. Such a tiny fraction. It's the least important part. I do it. It's all right. It's fun. There's lots of nice people on there. Occasionally there are scuffles. I learn stuff, whatever. It's such a tiny fraction. Like, get out in the real world and do stuff. Talk to people outside the echo chamber. Talk about research, because that's what we're here to do. Right? This isn't about ideology. It's time to move away from those kinds of movements because they've been damaged. Right? We're not going to reach good solutions. But anyway, so what I decided to do. So I didn't live net zero, but I realized that we set it up and it was great and we did good stuff. But I started kind of honing down my audience. And this is a science communication thing, right? The first thing they say is, who's your audience? So you kind of mentioned earlier, you might do talks to engineers. Like, absolutely, this is a really good idea. You understand that's an audience you can reach, and you would give a different talk to them, right? Than you would give to, say, university students. So for me, I'm reaching out to those students because I remember what it was like being one of them. And I needed to hear the talk I'm giving them, because it would have saved me 15 years, Chris. It would have saved me 15 years of doing actions, getting arrested and, printing T-shirts and getting my university to switch to renewable energy. It would have saved me all of that, and I could have gone straight to the source. And I don't want them to spend their 15 years doing the same thing before they reach the same conclusions. I'm just offering it to them. Right. So the first thing is know your demographic. The more I started thinking about, the more I thought, well, Nuclear Net Zero is quite nerdy. It's great people, but we're quite nerdy. We're quite niche. And I thought we can do stuff, but we're not appealing to those groups. The talks really were about reaching those groups. The ones who are already clear about climate change, they're going to end up, right? These kids who are at that age now, they're going to end up the CEOs of Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth. Some of them might end up as politicians, right? So this is the problem. You've got really free thinking, and they're bright spirited, and they care about the issues, and they've got all these other things they're thinking about. Traditional boomer environmentalists don't think about. That traditional group holds the keys because they're the CEOs, the politicians. So it's a long time until these groups kind of gain power. But the main thing is not to try and stop them losing that 15 years of falling into, no, we need degrowth, no, we need system change, no, we need to reduce our emissions because we need to reduce our personal emissions. We need to just stop banging on about things that aren't really solutions. We need to go big scale and it really appeals to them, really appeals to them. So that's, the more I started thinking about that demographic, I started thinking, well, how do I appeal to them? How do I reach them? And that's why I've kind of come up with, even down to like the color scheme, the messaging. And again, it's very similar to what we did with Extinction Rebellion, where we just kind of honed in on what are our core messages, who are we trying to reach. So I did a lot of deep dive brainstorming. What was I like at that age? What would I have responded to? When I was anti-nuclear, I was that age, but I was questioning, and what did I need to hear? What do I need to hear? And how can I help? That's it. And so I've kind of honed the talks, because I started out, as I say, talking a lot about pitfalls of nuclear, like the mythology, the myths you hear, and then I realized they don't even need to hear that, and I started cutting that out, and actually started putting in more about my personal background, because people in the questions people would come up and they would say, well, and so I started putting in pictures of me sitting on my mum's lap in India when I was 4, because it would show you that this is what poverty looks like. I'm not making this up. This isn't some shill campaign with loads of money behind it. This is my life. This is their life. And these are real people. This is billions of people who live like this. Let's take a frank look at that and then say, we're the ones that are in for apocalyptic scenarios. They're already living this reality. It's frankly an insult to them to speak, to use that kind of language. And I say that as someone who was using that language, because I was in a group where that was their messaging. I started working out this kind of new messaging and looking at doing events basically as soon as the restrictions are lifted. And the first thing actually that I've been working on, because I want it to be more than just in Britain. That's another thing, Nuclear Net Zero is very Britain based. I was kind of thinking this needs to be bigger than that. This needs to be all around Europe, because I have so many people across Europe reaching out saying, help us with strategy. So I have a lot of these calls as well. What do we do? We're not activists. How would you approach this? And it's different in each country, right? Here, I'm trying to build stuff because a lot of our old reactors are shutting down. In France, they're trying to stop them closing them. In some, it's completely different. So your strategy is different. As you said, in some places they're more concerned about climate. That's your messaging. In some places, that's not really. It's more about jobs or unions. So it's all about kind of just honing it down. That's kind of what I've been doing. And the other thing is just getting people up, getting them off, getting them up on the streets. That's what I want to do as soon as the restrictions are lifted. So I'm actually looking at doing potentially a big event in France, because I've got great allies there, know a little bit about organizing, and I've been advising them on some stuff they can do. It's just kind of like a gentle way in for first time activists maybe, and just I'm going to go down as soon as the restrictions are lifted. I'm going to go down there and organize something. So you'll hear something about that soon. I'm also in the meantime, because it's hard to do stuff in person, I've going to next week announce that I've got these starter packs for people who are who just want to jump in and start doing stuff in the campaign. So you basically just send us your address. If you're on a mailing list, you'll get an email anyway asking if you want to give us your address, and you get a little action card. This tells you, just gives you some, I think you can see up there, it gives you some useful information on how to start a little social media campaign. You'll get a free poster, and what we're asking is you just pick a poster or wear a badge. You'll get a free badge. And just post it to social media, and the hashtags are all on the little kind of bus card there. Right. And you might sound like a small thing, but A, it's easy because it's a pandemic, and B, when I first joined Extinction Rebellion, my first campaign that I did was an online one, which was posting a picture. It was nude. It was you post a picture nude, and then you covered yourself with the poster. I know, if you look deeply enough, you'll find one of you. But I got lots of people to do it. Lots of people with a hashtag. We were trying to get it trending, and it was to do with the heat wave, because we had our tabloid press kind of celebrating record heat waves, and we were saying, whoa, this is bad. That's not, so we had this campaign of you had a climate message on a poster. A lot of them were just people who made the posters at home with a photo, and it did end up in the press. So it's harder to get press for nuclear stuff. It's harder. That's another bridge that we got to cross.
So actually, I'd love to talk about that, because I've had a similar experience where you kind of largely feel locked out of legacy media. It's possible to get into some small town newspapers, particularly in communities where they have reactors and they understand it a bit better. But many nuclear advocates, we seem to only be able to get published in sort of center-right or right-wing publications. There's certainly a strong tendency, on the left, which is kind of where I emerged from, to sort of only read within approved kind of texts. And if you are to read something in a questionable newspaper or something that's published on, questionable content in the past, then, you're kind of legitimizing that platform. That's the kind of critique that you run into, right?
Yeah. So,
You know, but,
yeah.
but there's like, we have to get our message out. And if we're being kind of barred from, you know, progressive media, what choice do we have? So how have you navigated that? You had a piece in Quillette recently. Tell me a bit about your thinking on that regard. Does that
that did cause some controversy. I could have a good relationship with Claire, though. I really like her, and I found her to be a very supportive, very intelligent person. Love that she's just gone and started Quillette. I mean, it's what I did with Hourglass or Extinction Rebellion. So I know how much work is involved, you know, as an editor and doing all of the stuff she's doing. So and also massively appreciate. This is a funny thing, right, with right-wing press that you'll never hear generally, but it's the truth. My experience is she barely changed a word, and she just printed it, including the title, as I sent it to her. You know how many times that's happened? I could count it on 2 fingers. And that's from me writing traditionally for leftists. They just edit everything. They edit it heavily, fit their messaging. It's quite unusual, actually, and I have a lot of respect for a platform that does that. And I appreciate people are then saying, but it goes into this territory where you shouldn't talk about X, Y, and Z. I mean, this is a problem, right? If being in an echo chamber. And over here, you know, we've got left papers. And I said, when I had these messages about Quillette saying, why have you written for Quillette? I said, I pitched to all of those papers first. I pitched to Guardian and the Indie and Grist and Vox and Vice. I pitched to everybody. You know, what does that tell you about who's taking it? And as for just denying yourself a platform, I kind of just refuse to do it. I mean, I'm not saying that there aren't lines I would draw, but I've looked at Quillette. I think it's decent. Claire's decent. I had this with the Daily Mail when I wrote in the Daily Mail a year ago. And people were really angry about that, you know, and it prompted that statement from Extinction Rebellion. But actually, I stand by that article because I wrote about climate change in the Daily Mail, which is a paper, as their criticism was, this paper denies climate change. You know what? Then their readers read something that was all about the climate emergency. I had people say, but how can you? They're so anti-migrants. And I said, and a daughter of immigrants wrote an article in that paper for those people reading it. I mean, come on. This is a problem, right? Everything's become so polarized. It's dangerous. It's really dangerous. I'm not saying there shouldn't be a line sometimes where you say, I'm not going to engage with that person. They've done X or said X. I'm not saying that. But a lot of these cases, it's just not fair. And actually, as I say, my experience has been there's a lot of editing that goes on by both sides. But my experience has been that it's worse. It's been traditionally worse on the left. So, you know, and maybe that's why it took me a long time to hear views that were different to mine, because I was reading these traditional papers, which I don't do now. Now I read very widely, and I love Twitter for that because I do get a wide range of views. And actually, it just centered my thinking even more. Like, I'm right. All these people here say I must be right, and it's very hard then to leave that. And everybody, Chris, agrees that that's wrong. That's bad. Flat earthers, anti-vaxxers. We're all doing it. We're all doing it because we're just sticking to our little box over here. We have to branch out, really, and we have to talk to different groups, take that leap, you know. And if all the lefty people say, I'm not writing for Quillette or the Mail because X, Y, Z, guess what? Then your views aren't represented. I mean, it's as simple as that. The views that you don't like are represented instead. So it's unfortunate, though. It's unfortunate I'm practically blacklisted from those lefty papers, because that's very much my background, you know. What can you do? I mean, and on that note, you know, I'm working with Joel Scott Hawkes, who's from Nuclear Net Zero, from Extinction Rebellion. We're in Emergency Reactor. He's co-founded it, and he's set up another campaign because his biggest passion is rewilding, and he set up this campaign straight away. His press release got in the Guardian straight away. It got in all the green places, just like that. Like that. It's amazing how easy it was.
Do you have any do you have any theories about why it is? Because I you know, in terms of, I mean, even, you know, I've had some articles that I thought would play well in more sort of populist or right-wing press. It's hard to get articles in the news about nuclear, and I'm wondering, like, particularly in these progressive magazines, I mean, this should drive a lot of readership. It's a controversial topic. You know, these are really interesting ideas. You know, for me, that's kind of clickbait. Maybe I'm biased here. Do you think it's kind of people writing in and threatening their subscriptions? Like, what do you think is the physical mechanism?
100%. That's exactly what it is, Chris. When there's a very prominent environmentalist here who's written pro-nuclear stuff for the Guardian before. He's a Guardian columnist, and he had so many negative emails and attacks that he basically
This is George Monbiot, right? Like we can be.
basically didn't mention it again. And when I wrote for the Mail, he emailed me and said he was worried about me. He said, you shouldn't go down this route. It's really negative. You'll get blacklisted. And I had a long conversation with him on the phone. In the back of my head, kind of thinking, well, it's easy for you to say this in a really privileged position where you can just write whatever you want and they'll print it, and I don't see you offering me that platform sort of thing. But, I did listen to him and I heard he was concerned. You'll just get blacklisted as that person and then they won't touch you. But actually, what I realized is it's the topics they wonon't touch. It's not about me. I have a long history of climate activism. I'm very left, actually. But it's the topic. And that's why we need to shift that with the readers, right? The young people, you want them to subscribe to your dying newspaper. You need to talk about the topics they care about rather than listening when the old school boomers all write in en masse. And you know that they do because you've seen what those groups are like, right? And we don't stand for it anymore with stuff like vaccination. We don't stand for it anymore. But with nuclear, it still gets a pass, which is why that information's got to get out there.
And I think that's part of when I started thinking strategically about organizing, I think, hey, like we need to create groups like you're creating, build these mailing lists, and we need to send those letters into the editor, because often your perception as an editor, as a politician, if you get 10, 15 letters, you start to go, holy shit. Like I know there's this calculation in a constituency office where if someone comes into your office, that's kind of worth 1,000 people. If someone writes a letter, that's worth like 100 people. If someone like sends you a little click, something that they clicked off a website, that's worth like 10 people.
I know editors, but I know editors who've been put off by one comment,
right
by one email.
And so
they're just people.
And it's incumbent on our movements to mobilize people and balance that out, I think, and give some courage to these progressive magazines and newspapers that, hey, there is another perspective, to get that feedback. I don't know, old habits die hard. I think these newspapers are run by that kind of boomer generation. They've got strong opinions as well. Like I'm just trying to understand the mechanisms as to why
they are run by them, but they're increasingly employing younger people, right?
Yeah.
So that change is happening, and I think it's inevitable. And actually, all that press is dying out anyway. I also think that's going to happen. It's mostly just going to be digital media, but it's really important. Reach out to them and have those conversations, because you don't know who's writing the opposite view in, right? You don't know. If you're not doing it, don't assume you're being represented, basically.
I got to give credit to that generation, particularly to George Monbiot. I mean, he was writing right after Fukushima, going toe to toe with Helen Caldicott, taking that very unpopular opinion. And I mean, those kind of figures, I feel like they have a lot of trauma, right? Because they very much are a part of the environmental movement. There's this, I've talked about it a lot, but that sort of psychological impulse, like evolutionary psychology, not wanting to be exiled from your tribe, because evolutionarily there were very real consequences to that. The hyenas would get you. And I kind of see it as a relay race, and I don't, I hold them in high esteem in an ongoing way, even if they have to step away from the top, because there's only so much abuse you can put up with. And they kind of carved out and created a space for us to be safe to do that. And I'm glad that like folks like you are not backing down in the face of it. And I think that's partially because we're standing on the shoulders of giants like George,
I was just thinking that exact phrase. I was going to say it. And also let's go there. Mike as well, Mike Schellenberger.
Yeah.
He's got scars on his back for some of his work. I know that lots of people have lots of opinions of him, but he has made it easier for me to go and talk about stuff.
Okay,
he's kind of taken the hits along the way, and is a bit more resilient than some of the others who backed away from it. Which I agree with you; it's understandable.
Okay, so this is a question I have for you, because something I've been dealing with recently. It's easy to start to become very embittered, right? Like for me, it was Indian Point being shut down, and environmental groups like Sierra Club and NRDC, what I've called dancing on the grave of that, clean energy cathedral that provided more power than all of the wind and solar in state. Like it's easy to become very upset and angry and activated and potentially kind of cynical and dark. Is this like a self-care issue? Like how do you not succumb to that? Because I found like maybe my messaging is getting a bit nasty, or like I'm really trying to kind of project who I am, which are sort of good, positive vibes, optimism, to be an attractive, public figure, and to draw that positive energy in. But, there's times when it gets dark, right? And when this battle becomes very challenging. And, it's frustrating enough trying to fight against, these big fossil fuel interests, but when you're having to do a rearguard action, or maybe even it's the dominant action you do to sort of engage with these environmental groups that are vandalizing the climate, how do you stay optimistic, positive, keep your messaging optimistic in that situation?
It's a good question. I have developed a very thick skin.
Yeah.
Is the first thing I would say. I think there is more to that. I think it is a self-care thing. I spend a lot of time in nature. I spend a lot of time with my kids.
Hmm.
I go in Twitter and I use it, but I wouldn't say I live there. I mean, some people just live and they get really, and there's a word for it, right? Doom scrolling, you're just scrolling all day. I don't do that. Like I'm
Yeah.
out and I'm doing stuff, doing stuff, composting in the garden, whatever. And then I come back to it and I can tell that I have a more fresher perspective. This
Hmm.
isn't all
Hmm.
that's out there. Or I take my telescope out and then I'm like, none of this matters anyway. So I
Yeah,
think some of it
totally.
is that. I also think that um, it's really important to look at things on a large scale. Let's look on a huge scale. So if you hone in, right, I could be bitter. I'm really bitter because this environmental group misled me, and then they were nasty to me when I left, and they publicly said don't platform her. Right, I could be bitter, right? I could be
Hmm.
bitter. I'm going to go and write for all that right wing press because they're embracing me. We don't
Right.
like them, and they're
Join
bad.
the new
I could do
tribe.
that,
Yeah. Yeah.
but actually, on a larger scale, isn't it great that I've reached this point, right? Someone 15 years ago might not have. As you say, there are some figures, but actually you can count them on one hand, the number of people that managed to do it.
Hmm.
And so if you look at incrementally, things are going that direction anyway. And at some point, we will rely on vast amounts of nuclear technology. There's just no question, right? I'm not even just talking about energy, I'm talking about space tech. Like,
Hmm.
if you look at the advances, there's no question. So I kind of don't feel like, oh, we're losing and I'm bitter. And I just accept that everybody's human and we all make mistakes and we don't all get it right. And I've definitely advocated for some things I would now say that are wrong now,
Hmm.
But so I don't get too wrapped up in the personal and the close up. I look in the wider picture and I think, isn't it incredible the things that we're achieving? Yes, there's also shit stuff happening. Sorry, am I allowed to say that? Yes, there's
Yeah, of
also bad
course.
stuff happening. That's always been happening, right? Actually, poverty is less than it's ever been, right? There's all
Hmm.
these brilliant initiatives. Maybe we don't agree with them, but there's lots of brilliant initiatives to do good things in the world. Ultimately, me, it comes down to an intrinsic belief that people are good and amazing.
Hmm.
That's it. And if you don't believe that, and you don't have an intrinsic to come back to, then yeah, definitely all the extrinsic stuff hits you. But I just spend time with my kids or people that I care about, and I just think, wow, people are amazing.
Yeah.
And you just have that, right? You spend time with someone, you just think, how
Uh,
inspired. I just put a tweet out today, tagging a bunch of people. I tagged you as well. A bunch of people just saying, and actually, if you look at those people, some of them are right wing, some of them are left wing, some of them I don't know. Some of them, one guy I even mentioned, I don't even know what his real name is. I don't know where he lives. But I
crispy dog.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Shout out to Crispy Dog, because you know why I tagged you? Because you've inspired me. And
Yeah.
that's all it was. I tagged a bunch of people that inspired me. And the more I started to do it, the more I thought, you know what? I'll be here all day. There's too many. How
Yeah.
incredible is that? Because you don't think of that when you think of social media. You think of all the
Yeah.
negatives. Imagine going through the pandemic without social media.
Yeah.
I remember I was on the cusp, I'm a millennial, where we didn't have the tech and then we did have the tech. It would have
Yeah.
been terrible. It would have been terrible. I have everything I want to watch on telly. I have everything I want to do outside. I am very, very lucky and very privileged. And if I can use my little platform in the world to try and bring that to other people, which is why I care about these issues essentially, is because of poverty,
Hmm.
because of energy inequality. And that's really good motivation. And I don't let one or two people get me
Yeah.
down. If
Yeah.
anything, I look at them, especially when people are nasty. And I had a weird email the other day, which I posted online, which was just so weird and creepy and misogynistic, commenting on my body and stuff. But and
Yeah.
even then people are like, I'm so sorry, okay. And I said, it really just doesn't impact me anymore. I just think, wow, I'm really glad I'm not in that person's head.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's in terms of sustaining oneself, and I think this is something, and I was sort of in this mindset as well a few years ago with kind of climate doomerism, like, hey, maybe I don't want to bring a child into this world. I mean, playing with my own son, my neighbor has 3 kids, and you know. I think because I'll probably only end up having one child just because of circumstances. But I was like, this large family is so beautiful. The way these 2 brothers and their sister interact, and just like playing tag with them for a few hours is one of the most sort of like soul sustaining things I've done in a while. And I just, it was this moment of just this sense of his utter rejection of Malthusianism, playing with these children and just being like, they're wonderful. I mean, it's, kids are, they're so innocent at that stage and everything, but it brings a lot of joy. And really in that moment, I had this just huge sense of, how wrong this Malthusian impulse was, and that humans are awesome, right? There's troubles out there. We're complex species, but we can do a lot of good. We just have a few minutes left. And again, I know, often your campaigns, there's a kind of surprise element to them. So I don't want you to kind of give anything away, but some of the other things you've done, the light projections, that was really cool. I know Nuclear New York has done that as well now, renting a massive projector and going around and doing those kind of actions. I guess without kind of doing any great reveals, do you have any other cutting edge, exciting tactics or tools that you want to kind of share? Again, without giving too much away.
So my website, if you go to my website, emergencyreactor.org, it's just a single page at the moment, but I'm developing it as we go along. And will be a take action page any day now. Mm-hmm. And that's going to have simple things you can do, whether it's email your MEP in Europe, here's a standard letter, get involved with the campaign, tag yourself on social media with a poster. And one of the things will be how to do a light projection, because I've had so many emails, including that in New York group, just saying, how did you do it? I wrote up a document. Right. I still get people saying, and what file do you need? And so we're just going to put it all on there, easy access. You know how to do it. And actually, I hope it becomes a thing.
Yeah.
A thing that we started. I don't want to give too much away, but
fair.
But just keep your eye on what's going to happen in France. That's what I'm saying.
Cool.
I'm going. Something's going to happen.
Just as a closing thought, I think it would be really awesome to create sort of a manual, and drawing on the experience of allies around the world, the kind of actions they're doing, what's worked, and understanding that every country is a little bit different and the audience is a bit different, as you've emphasized. But I really think we need to come up with a sort of pro-nuclear advocacy manual, where we can knowledge share. And that's happening more and more, through, there's more and more podcasts now, there's more and more platforms, the Twitter world, there's more and more connections and webs that are happening. But I just wanted to kind of plant that seed. Certainly something that I was thinking about with our kind of anniversary here at Decouple, a project that I would like to get going on. And certainly that'd be really fun to collaborate on, Zion. So thanks again for coming on the show. We look forward to following your campaigns and seeing what's coming next. The organization, is it mostly kind of UK and Europe, or are you trying to crack into North America?
So far, but if you want to get involved and you want to help set up branches around the world, help with actions, anything, advice, get in touch. That's what we're here for. And we've got branding packs, we've got stuff you can edit, make your own posters in your own language. There's lots of stuff that we can do, and we have resources.
Yeah.
Which is why I wanted to set up my own, and get some funding for it, so that I'd have some resources, because it's hard to get resources in the nuclear space, right? Extinction Rebellion was easy. Yeah. So there's an added challenge. There's lots of added challenges. Essentially, activism is activism, and there's lots we can do if we work together. So yeah, get in touch. Emergencyreactor.org. And thanks for having me, Chris.
For sure. It's been a pleasure.
All right.
Okay. We'll talk soon.
Bye.